Have you ever wondered why we tend to favor the things or people we know well over the unfamiliar? Let's take a stroll down the aisles of our everyday lives, and you'll see this pattern emerge time and again. Imagine you're in a bookstore surrounded by a plethora of books. You're looking for a new read, but you're overwhelmed by the choices. Suddenly, your eyes land on a title by an author whose book you've enjoyed before. Without a second thought, you pick it up, leaving the unknown authors behind. Or picture yourself at a party where a sea of unfamiliar faces greets you. Amidst the crowd, you spot a friend of a friend whom you've met a couple of times before. You find yourself drawn to them, choosing to strike up a conversation with this somewhat known person, rather than venturing into the unknown territory of strangers. These are just everyday examples of a psychological phenomenon that quietly influences our choices and preferences. It's called the mere exposure effect. This fascinating concept was discovered by scientists exploring the strange and complex world of human behavior. The mere exposure effect is our tendency to develop a preference for things or people simply because they are familiar to us. In other words, we are creatures of habit, swaying towards the known and the comfortable. It's not always about the best or the most logical choice. Sometimes it's just about what feels familiar. This effect doesn't just apply to choosing books or navigating social situations. It seeps into our romantic relationships, our friendships, our job preferences, and even our choices in music and food. The mere exposure effect is a silent puppeteer, subtly pulling the strings of our preferences and decisions, often without us even noticing. So the next time you find yourself drawn to the familiar, remember it's not just coincidence or comfort. It's your mind subtly leaning towards the well-trodden path, the known entity, the familiar face. And just like that, our minds are inclined to favor the familiar, leading us to the phenomenon known as the mere exposure effect. The mere exposure effect isn't a recent discovery. It has its roots in the extensive research of sociologists, psychologists, and behaviorists. The story of its discovery takes us back to the days of fervent research in the realm of human behavior, where scientists were exploring the intricacies of what shapes our preferences. The phenomenon was first observed in a highly intriguing experiment. Participants were shown a series of photographs of faces. Some of these faces were shown repeatedly, while others made only a few appearances. The faces themselves were neutral, devoid of any distinguishable expressions that could influence the participants' reactions. The findings of this experiment were nothing short of fascinating. The participants consistently rated the faces they had seen more frequently as more attractive than those they had seen less often. It was as if familiarity had cast a spell, making the frequently seen faces more appealing, more likable. It was clear that there was something more at play here than meets the eye. This was the birth of the mere exposure effect, a psychological phenomenon that suggests that we tend to develop a preference for things simply because we are familiar with them. It was a significant step forward in understanding the subtle forces that shape our likes and dislikes, our attractions and repulsions. The study was a revelation. It underscored the power of familiarity, demonstrating that even with inanimate stimuli like faces, repeated exposure could significantly influence our preferences. It was a testament to the idea that our minds gravitate towards what they know, what they've seen before, what feels comfortable and safe. This groundbreaking study laid the foundations of our understanding of the mere exposure effect. It opened up a new avenue of exploration in human behavior, shedding light on the unseen forces that guide our preferences. The mere exposure effect is a testament to the power of familiarity, a reminder that our likes and dislikes may be shaped more by what we know than by what we think. The implications of the mere exposure effect stretch far beyond the confines of a research laboratory. This intriguing psychological phenomenon has a profound influence on how we form attractions and relationships. Picture a familiar setting, perhaps a classroom or a workplace. There's a person you see daily, someone who is just a part of your routine. At first, they are just another face in the crowd. But over time, as you see them day in and day out, you begin to develop a liking for them. You may not know why, but you find their presence comforting, their face attractive. This is the mere exposure effect at work. It's not necessarily their sense of humor or their intelligence or even shared interests that's drawing you in. Instead, it's the sheer familiarity. The repeated exposure to this individual has led to an increase in liking, an increase in attractiveness. It's a subtle, almost unnoticeable process, but it's happening. Now, let's take this a step further. Imagine you're in a room full of strangers. Your eyes are likely to be drawn to the faces you've seen before, even if you don't consciously remember them. This is because our brains are wired to prefer the known to the unknown. Familiarity provides a sense of security and comfort, which can translate into attraction. The mere exposure effect is a powerful tool in the world of marketing and advertising as well. Brands utilize this phenomenon to their advantage, repeatedly exposing consumers to their products or logos. The more we see something, the more we tend to like it. But let's circle back to human relationships. The mere exposure effect can play a significant role in how friendships are formed, how romantic relationships bloom, or how we choose our social circles. It's an integral part of our social fabric, subtly influencing our preferences and choices. So, the next time you find yourself inexplicably drawn to someone you see regularly, remember, it might just be the mere exposure effect at play. As we navigate through the digital age, the mere exposure effect has found new avenues to influence our preferences. In this era of constant connection, where we're only a click away from interacting with old friends or making new ones, the mere exposure effect takes on a different light. Social media platforms, from Facebook and Instagram to Twitter and LinkedIn, have become the new playground for this psychological phenomenon. Consider how you scroll through your social media feed. You're likely to encounter the same faces, the same usernames, and the same posts. Over time, these repeated exposures might subtly influence your preferences. You might find yourself more inclined to interact with those profiles you see more frequently. This isn't limited to just profiles of people you know. Think about the influencers you follow, the celebrities whose lives you track, or the brands you engage with. The more you're exposed to their content, the more you might find yourself developing a preference for them. But here's the catch. Unlike the traditional face-to-face exposure, where you interact with people in person, social media exposure is often without direct interaction. You might never have met the person whose pictures you like or the influencer whose posts you share. Yet the repeated exposure to their online presence can still lead you to develop a preference for them. This is the mere exposure effect at work in the digital age. It's influencing how we form online connections and relationships. It's shaping our perceptions of attractiveness and likability in the vast digital landscape. So, the next time you find yourself repeatedly engaging with a certain profile or developing a newfound interest in a brand you've been exposed to frequently, remember it might be more than just coincidence. It could be the power of the mere exposure effect, subtly shaping your preferences and behaviors. In this digital era, the mere exposure effect might be shaping our online connections more than we realize. Understanding the mere exposure effect can add depth to our comprehension of human social dynamics. Let's delve deeper into how this phenomenon and other psychological subtleties shape our preferences and behaviors, adding a layer of complexity to the concept of attraction. Attraction, as it turns out, isn't merely a matter of physical appeal or shared interests. It's a multifaceted process, a dance of the mind influenced by a plethora of psychological factors. The mere exposure effect is one such factor, subtly nudging our preferences towards what is familiar. Consider for a moment the people you find attractive. You might think it's their physical appearance or charming personality that draws you in. But could it be that you've simply seen them more often, heard their voice more frequently? The mere exposure effect suggests that the answer could very well be yes, but it doesn't stop there. This effect also interacts with other psychological phenomena. Take, for example, the halo effect, our tendency to assume that if someone is good in one aspect, they must be good in others. The mere exposure effect can amplify this, leading us to perceive someone we often see as not just attractive but also intelligent, kind, and other positive traits. Similarly, the mere exposure effect can intertwine with cognitive dissonance, a state of tension that occurs when we hold two conflicting beliefs or when our actions contradict our beliefs. For instance, if we find ourselves repeatedly exposed to someone we initially didn't like, we may start to find them more attractive to resolve this dissonance. These intricacies make the tapestry of attraction far more complex than it might seem at first glance. It's not just about shared hobbies, physical appeal, or even personality traits. It's also about how often we see someone, how familiar they become, and how this familiarity interplays with other psychological phenomena. So the next time you find yourself drawn to the familiar, remember, you're experiencing the fascinating power of the mere exposure effect.
Subscribe to the channel for more video, and please give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed this.